This is the Dikpala of the Nadir, which are guardians of the universe, and this remains in China Sing Surrey. So the photograph on the top was taken in 1909 by the great Dutch scholar J.L.R. Brandes. It was then photographed again in 1939 by Blom, but the images were lost. Now if you look at the photograph at the top, the pattern of the Bourg design is quite clear. When you look at my photograph on the bottom, which was taken in 2014, you can still see the design on the knee. It's clear enough. It was clear enough for you and my artisan to make the drawings. But what's happened now, and I visited just a couple of weeks ago in 2022, the pattern is now completely disappeared. And my role here with the production of this book, Plaque Splendor, is to bring to you things that have gone, because they will continue to disappear. So these would have been adorned in royal attire, these sculptures. There would have been 8 of them around this particular chanty. And even the tortoise, which is at the front, is not depicted here, was decorated with a design as well, that replicated within the statue. And by looking at the ornamentation over the front of the sculpture and the patterning around the legs, you can show how important this statue would be. This image of an unidentified goddess was also photographed by me in about 2014 when the pattern appeared. You see from the drawing and the photograph at the bottom, but you can still see the surface of the design of these interconnecting circles. Now again in 2022, this pattern has completely disappeared. The weather has taken advantage, along with the school kids that like to jump on the sculptures. So once again, the book is able to bring this to you. I also suggest that these designs are influenced from China, from Liao, China, where they use a lot of textile patterns in this type of motif. Again, the pressure parameter, this one remains a Boyalangu. Unfortunately, it's covered by a rooftop. Again, the design has completely disappeared now. And when I photographed this, it was already wobbly, as it were. I could only just see it. But this is also a royal pattern and a royal sculpture. We go from the type of the way her hide is formed and the amount of ornamentation. These 3 legs appear in the National Museum, and then the legs of the 3 attendants of the Amoka Pasha that come from China Jago. So they represent Sudara, Kamara, Prukti, and Salantara. They're probably the finest of all the carving in the Sing-Sara period, and are definitely my favorite sculptures. And they form the length of the body. Each one, you remember that these are all attendant, so you would assume they would all be carved the same, but they're not. Each one is different. In each pattern, if you study the drawing at the bottom, you see that each one differs just enough to show that the craftsman was copying something that was there. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was not just making up the design. These statues are extremely important because they are our earliest evidence of what's referred to as Balakachan motif in Minangkabau in West Sumatra. There is a very important person who's made a lot of work and research on this, the Dutch Swiss man Bernard Park, who works with the Menang people, and he's created songket today using these sculptures as a template. So I propose these sculptures are wearing what would have been a woven fabric in a songket of some sort. So the drawings at the end of the section on East Java, you now see the patterns have changed considerably from Central Java. They become much more complex and much more detailed, and become have images of people appearing as well. So research problems. I'm going to bring you to this statue, and in fact it involves pictures of my husband who's in the audience. We're trying to research this sculpture, which we knew had something interesting on it. When we got there, we found that the whole statue was surrounded by stone, metal railings, and I knew I had to get inside, so I'm afraid we broke a few regulations and clambered over the top. Sometimes doing research creates difficulties, and you have to fight through these to get to what you need. And the only way I could have done this, now the statue is unavailable completely. But when we actually got to the end of it, it was worth it, because the most wonderful textile design was quite clear. And Augustia is a very important statue to the Hindu period. There are many of them, and this is one of the few that has the detailed design. Another problem is often in the museum. This remains in a box. The picture on the left is the photograph I took many years ago. You get to the top of the museum, you know there's an important sculpture, it sits in a box, the lighting is terrible, what are you going to do? You can't research it, you have to have a good camera. So on the right, I eventually got a file photo for the book, but the problem with the file photo, there are no details. You can't see what you're researching. So you have to go and see things yourself, and then you need the help of the artists that have, of course, that created the drawings. And this last example I'll give you is the poverty that sits in the Chinese sari. When I was just there the other day, they now have a cover over the top of her, at least she's protected from the rain. But this design is almost now completely disappeared. This is a classic East Javanese sculpture, the climb is to the ankles. But what we're looking at here is a pattern of ducks and small animals. This is totally out of Central Asia. It's nothing to do with India or Java. This is pre-Chinese. And I'll give you some examples of this duck motif, but we also see it appearing in India, but the influence on that sculpture would have been from China and not from India. But the consummate skill of the craftsman to create this design, he knew what he was doing, and he would have had an example in front of him. So these are just examples of where this small duck motif appears in other sculptures. Period, and this divine couple on the top left. The image of the queen at the bottom has no textile pattern, which is quite interesting, but why she was never carved, I have no idea. But the royal couple is another one of my favourite statues. They remain in a back corner, hidden away in the National Museum. And the only way you're going to see the pattern is to get down on your hands and knees and sit on the ground. Because on the legs it's all worn away. If you look at the sash at the side of the body and underneath the knees, you will then see the carving of the Pullen design is very much still there. Again, with this huge harihara, which also is in the National Museum, here the design is still very evident. And we now have the ubiquitous Pullen design, part of the Chetrock pattern group, that appears on all the Majapahit sculptures. In fact, any large sculpture is all different versions of this particular design. And this design, of course, we're sitting here in Central Java, is now ubiquitous with Kraton in Central Java. It's become one of the Larangan designs. So we know the motif might have also originated from the orangu palm fruit, but I think that this pattern is actually much older than that. So I'm going to skip that slide. And we go to this very last design of the Bhima. We now come right to the end of the Majapahit period, where he's now wearing a loincloth, and the image of Bhima wears something that is representing Pullen design, which is very synonymous with Balinese statues. By now, all the main carvings have disappeared. There is another one, Bhima, which I'm hoping to see tomorrow, which I'm not actually seeing, this is someone else's photograph. So he's always created with this type of loincloth. So this is the textile patterns right at the end of the Majapahit period and into the few that appear in Sumatra. So really to summarize, the Museum Singasari in Malang has installed over the last few years, in 2015, replicas of the Singasari statues. But the carvings are not from the photographs. They made their own carvings, but they have not interpreted the textile patterns. And it's unfortunate because few of the people who are going to have a look at these are not going to see the original designs. So important as students, when you look at something, to really understand what you're looking at and to create something that's directly replica and not to make it up your head and think, well, I'll just do something else. And we're also here to work on the sculptures that have disappeared. So I hope the book Pattern Splinter will show you of the patterns that have long since gone.